All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Performance Plus podcast. This is going to be episode number 3 in our Build Your Engine series. And what we're going to do in our next couple episodes is Johnny's going to kind of break down the different days that he would program for a CrossFit or functional fitness athlete trying to develop their overall energy systems. And we're going to start the first episode in this series talking about zone 2 cardio. Other people refer to it as low intensity steady state cardio. Other people say your aerobic pace building, but essentially we're just talking about being really focused on building that aerobic base when we're talking about zone 2 cardio. So Johnny, why do we want to do this? How does this help the CrossFit athlete? And then we'll jump after that into how to actually program it.
Okay, so we're starting, we're going to start this conversation with we'll call it 5 different areas that we're programming for. Some of that is the zone 1 active recovery area. I'm going to leave that completely off the table in this conversation because that is generally resting, walking, or barely moving. And I think most of the people listening to this probably, got that dialed in. So
I'm pretty good at that.
other than that, there's going to be 4 zones or areas that we're targeting, starting with aerobic endurance, or I'll call it pace building inside of the app, or people now call it their zone 2 cardio. So this is a very, very critical area to train, probably especially for CrossFit athletes, because I think it's the thing that we do the least. Like, we have some of these zones, which I'll say in a little bit, very dialed in from doing Metcons, but we don't spend a lot of time at like 65 to 75% of our maximal heart rate, or 65 to 75% of our max workload, which we'll call our lactate threshold, doing just work. Most of the time we're up higher. And so being in this zone does a lot of things, but 2 of the key things are it increases your mitochondrial density, which is the part of the cell that is the powerhouse. So it makes more energy, which allows you to do more stuff. And then it also helps your heart become more efficient in quite a few ways. One of them is it actually creates eccentric hypertrophy of the left ventricle. So the part that pumps it, it makes it get bigger. Some people think that's a bad thing, and it could be a whole bad thing, but for the sake of us, it's actually a good thing. It allows us to have a bigger stroke volume of blood, so each pump has more blood coming out, which allows more oxygen to get in, which allows us to be more efficient. It actually reduces our heart rate, so we can do more work for each stroke of the heart that's going on. And inside of our plans, these are like I call them a pace builder, because even though you'll spend most of the time in this like quote unquote zone 2 area, to keep it entertaining, we start very, very slow and keep building up throughout the workouts. So Zach, does that make sense to you as like what is one piece of our 5 zones we're targeting?
It does. Zone 2 has been something that I've done a ton more of over the last year, even before doing, your rower build your engine program. And I've honestly found that I love zone 2 stuff quite a bit. Just I like to put it into a circuit more often when I do it. Yeah. Just so that I'm moving and getting a little bit of variety, but just that slow intensity is really good for so many athletes. Cause like you said, in CrossFit, we don't usually train that very much, but it has a lot of fitness benefits, but it also has the benefit of just not beating you up near as much as the high intensity stuff. So like in my physical therapy practice, I actually program a ton of zone 2 work for my athletes when they come to me dealing with multiple overuse injuries over the course of a year. Like, you tweak something once a year, no big deal. But if I see you for 3 different tendinopathies in the course of a year, then I know that the volume of training you're doing, the intensity, is just a little bit more than you can recover from right now. Maybe we need to talk about your nutrition. Maybe we need to do some accessory strength work for your tendons, a lot of different things like that. But a lot of times it's just that maybe your job is stressful. You're fighting with your spouse at home, just a lot of life stretch coming on. And you also can't handle doing full on CrossFit 6 days a week, but you still want to be in the gym working on your fitness. I think a great answer for a lot of individuals is to throw in a little zone 2. So either do that on your off day if you're looking for just an extra little performance boost that doesn't dig your hole deeper, or if you're that CrossFit athlete that's like, dude, I'm just not recovered between workouts right now, I need a period of time where things are less intense, but I still want to be in the gym because it's what we do as CrossFit athletes. Like
Right.
we want to be in the gym almost every day. So then just go in and do this low intensity stuff that's not going to take a lot for you to recover from, but it's going to, like you said, it's going to increase your mitochondrial density. Your muscle fibers themselves can do a better job producing power, and then the heart stuff's really cool. And I think the
Yep.
important thing to recognize about the left ventricle of your heart. So your heart has 4 different chambers. The left ventricle is where all that blood first comes into. The reason why zone 2 cardio has to be such low intensity, and we'll dive into the actual prescription of intensity, but the reason why it has to be so low is you need enough time for blood to actually fill up that left ventricle so that
Hmm.
it gets stretched out. If you don't blow on a balloon for long enough, it won't get to full size. If you just give it 2 puffs, it's going to be small. We want to really blow that balloon up and get that big stretch so that long term, every single time your heart pumps, it can pump more blood out. That's then going to support so much of the other stuff that we're going to talk about.
And that's a great analogy, a really, really great analogy. And to make it even like a crazier analogy, imagine that balloon was inflated by some wires coming off one side and then went back to the other. They were like this kind of connective network, where the pressure was high in one and then low in the other, and that gets into like arteries and veins. But like if you don't do that zone 2, like it's actually impossible for your arterial and venous system to have the pressure changes it needs to like pump enough blood in there to matter. And you can just go crazy with that stuff on YouTube if you want. But it's like if it's not low intensity, it ain't working. So you can go push a sled, an empty sled, around your block for a while with a and go slow enough and it will work. You can get on a bike, which is what I like to do because I can do other things while I'm sitting on the bike, and it will work. But there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. But the moral of the story is you got to stay in it. So in our plans, that is one of the key elements, is having these kind of pace building, lower intensity that are spending the most of the duration of time in there. So a minimum recommendation is like you at least need 30 minutes in this. And um, as with most things, you can increase the work time by 10 to 20% per session. So if you start with 30 minutes, you could increase it by 33 to 36, or 33 to 36 total minutes of work the next time. That's a great way to kind of progress yourself. It's very boring and monotonous, but it works. So if you're interested in doing your own zone 2 work, go for it like that. Um, the next area that we target is what we call the tempo zone. The tempo zone for CrossFit athletes is where you should spend most of your time, or you probably spend most of your time in metcons, outside of a few. So this is like your zone 3 heart rate, maybe the high end of your zone 3 heart rate. But this is where you're really good at doing work. Like you can just kind of exist in this state very, very well for a long time. If you're an endurance athlete, this is the pace that you would do a marathon at. Like you can do this for a very, very long period of time and not blow up. And we train tempo as well because it's an important part of developing a complete energy system. That being said, like I mentioned, if you're doing regular CrossFit classes, this might be the one where like you can make your life more efficient and not do this all the time, because I would guess that most people spend a lot of time in the tempo zone, and this is like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 80 to 85% of like your maximal heart rate. So and uh, again, different chemical reactions are happening here, but this is still all sort of inside of that oxidative pathway that we talked about in our last podcast, with energy systems. So you're still kind of training that same area. It's just a different level of that same area. Um, and these workouts, tempo workouts, a lot of time look like what Zach was talking about with his injured PT athletes. Like, hey, I'm doing a pretty good amount of work. I'm taxing my system pretty freaking hard, but like, it's not. It is definitely not my max effort. Like, I could do this for a long time. I could go do the workout Kelly for 7 rounds, let's say, instead of it being a 5-round workout. And it's a lot of volume of wall balls on my knees at the end of the day, and I'm probably going to get some maybe patellar pain if I do that too often. But the point of that being, that pathway is something that you don't need to train that much if you're doing a lot of CrossFit. It is something that you probably train pretty well. The next zone that we get into is or the next thing we're programming is threshold work. And this is like 80 to 80, 85 to 88% of maximal effort. And this is that area like right below our lactate threshold. So when we say this is like our aerobic threshold, the max amount of work that we can do while still being like mostly an oxidative energy system. And this is like I'm gonna say this is like your 5K pace. Maybe for some people it's their 1 mile pace if they're really like an intense like track athlete. But like uh, this is still something that you can operate in your threshold for a pretty long period of time. Um, any bit harder, if you had to work any bit harder, you would blow up. That bucket of water that we talked about in the energy system podcast would fill up, backflow, and you'd have to stop working. So the way we train this is by finding a threshold, and then we're taking a percentage of your max threshold or that max area you're at, and we're dividing into smaller chunks and then slowly building those up over time. So let's say we'll use wattage because it's so much easier to understand. That's your power output on a bike. So let's say Zach's max effort or threshold on a bike was 100 watts. This is his zone 4. To improve that, I might say, all right, Zach, we're going to work at 95 watts, so 95% of your threshold, but we're going to break it into 2 8-minute sessions. And there's going to be a rest period in between because it's going to get pretty close to blowing them up at the end of that. And then the next week, we're going to progress it with a little bit longer duration interval each time. So if you're at home and you're like, I want to do my own threshold work, figure out like where that like maximal pace is for that zone 4 and zone 4 heart rate area, and then train at like 95% of that and slowly build that up over time.
I'm laughing about this
Any
because of the messages I sent you a few weeks ago. So,
Zach sort of cleaned up some of my my poor typing and copying and pasting into our app, and there were times where it said zone 5
yeah.
and not zone 4 when it was supposed to be. So he actually worked at the next zone that we're going to talk about for
I also
like a whole
and I
interval.
miscalculated. So basically, I'm doing this workout, and I'm getting, I don't know, I'm like 60% of the way through it, and I just can't go. Like physically could not continue to work. It wasn't like I had redlined, but I'm just looking at the rower like, what the heck is happening here that I can't keep up? I stopped and rested for a minute, got back to it, and same thing, like within a minute of restarting, I cannot go again. And I'm a little embarrassed by the next part. I got so mad because I didn't realize that I was training at the wrong intensity right there that I threw my handle and the chain link popped out. And so then,
Oh,
because I lost my temper, I had to spend the next 45 minutes deassembling my rower to fix it, all
to
because
pull the chain
of
back out.
mistake in intensity here. So it's just, yeah, that was a bad day.
Yeah, Zach sends me a message and he's like typo in the app,
So I had,
and, and then
I had,
tells me that he
to
went.
be clear, I had printed out the workouts prior to Johnny publishing it correctly. So I was working off my printed sheets. And this is my fault because he told me he had fixed the app at this point. But yeah, it was a bad day.
So Zach was a perfect representation of what happens if you actually work in our next training zone, which is zone 5, which is that max area that we talked about earlier. So this is again is a small zone as far as like percentage. It's 90% or greater of your max heart rate. But this is actually, you can kind of do a little bit of work in here as well, depending on how fit you are. It's not necessarily just 10 seconds and then you're done. So I don't remember how long you made it, but your 90% of max is where we're going to see a VO2 max adaptation. So the adaptation that is going to allow for maximal oxygen uptake, where muscles can use the byproducts of that for energy. And initially, like, you're going to have to start working in this zone very, very short amounts of time. Sometimes it's even, there's some workouts that I love to use with people where it's like a progressive interval of running or rowing, where it's like 10 seconds and then 30 seconds off. It builds and builds and builds, and then gets a long period of rest. But those that allows you to push into this VO2 max area, and start creating these adaptations that you only get when you're going that hard of your percentage of max. And again, if you do this for too long, you will know, like Zach did, because you'll go to do your next thing and it won't work anymore. You will not be able to get back to the pace that you're working at. I'll tell a good story about this. So a few years ago, I was working with a girl named Jenna. This is before CrossFit changed the format and there was still regionals. And she was a regionals athlete at the time and really thought she could get to the games. And one of her biggest limiting factors was she kind of had a crappy VO2 max, for how fit she was in other areas. So I was just determined we were going to do this, but she was time poor and just couldn't like spend a lot of time just on steady state stuff. So I decided that we were going to do, she could do Fran in like 2 minutes, which is theoretically like a VO2 max zone. So I said, we're going to do 3 Frans today because you can do this amount of pull-up volume, you can do this amount of thruster volume, no problem. And we're just going to rest 1 to 2. So she PR'd her Fran on the first one. And then on the second one, she got to the pull-up bar and she was like just so backed up with lactate, she just like literally could not hold on
Ooh,
anymore. Went flying off the bar, crying. It was a mess. And that's where I learned, like, oh, if you go actual beyond like into the depths of this pathway, the zone 5 pathway, like your body's not going to recover for a very long amount of time. So building it up incrementally over time from like short durations of even 10 to 15 seconds of work with um, 1 to 2 rests, so 2 times the amount of work you did in rest, is key in order to develop adaptations in this zone.
as you build up, so if you're doing the 1 to 2 work rest, do you, as you build up the work, are you also increasing the rest time, or are you keeping rest time consistent? Like, how do you progress that?
So I will. We kind of have two kinds of workouts that attack this in our app or in our programs. So as you progress, we'll do some what we call max aerobic speed, which you still, again, zone 5, you have the baseline of it here, and then the top of it, which is lactate, like where you're going to die. So we kind of will go, hey, you're going to work for 10 seconds, and then you're going to rest for 10 seconds, and then build it that way. So we're keeping you less rest, but you're actually able to sustain that pace, because otherwise you get to a spot like, I think 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off is probably like uh, the end, where when people get very fit, they can maintain this threshold. But beyond that, you start resting for so long. Like, I remember James Fitzgerald, the OPEX dude, used to have this kettlebell swing burpee row workout, which he was a VO2 max workout for the right athletes. And but it was like a 3 minute workout, but he wanted you to rest for 12 minutes in between each session when you got to this point in the training plan, which made sense. Like if you were going full speed at it, but like most people don't have 36 minutes in their day to sit on a box and stare at their rower and kettlebell waiting to start again. And so it just, yeah, at a certain point, it gets kind of dumb. And so we progress it like that, where we keep the rest the same.
Like that?
Yeah. Freaking, that workout was terrible. But so, uh, these are the kind of, again, the kind of workouts that we're using in our system. And I think a lot of people that do we'll call it steady state endurance based training too. This is how we skin this cat. It works very, very well. If you're a nerd and you want to try and figure this stuff out on your own, that's a pretty good template for doing it. But training all of these, again, we said it in the first podcast in the series, we're going to say in this one, training all of these are critical. If you're a CrossFit athlete, training the tempo zone and maybe even the threshold zone, depending on what your gym is programming, are probably the least critical. But training the VO2 max and the aerobic endurance place is really, really critical. We see these as being quite undertrained pathways for CrossFit athletes.
Nice. So if you want done for you programs, though,
Yep.
We've
We got
got
them. They're
through
great.
performanceplusprogramming.com, we have right now a air bike version, a rower
Hmm.
version, a running version. And those
Yep.
are nice. I have not ever spent a ton of time working on my rowing technique. And I'd say running through that program not only helped from a full body like energy systems perspective, but if you know that you have a piece of cardio equipment that you just suck at or you should be better at. For me as a 6'2" athlete, I should be a much better rower than what I was. And getting that 6 weeks of targeted work on it was really, really nice. We do for our members have a couple other resources available for you inside the app if you're a Performance Plus member that are worth mentioning now. There is a PDF for members in there that has a ton of zone 2 workouts. So say you love
Oh
your gym's
yeah.
programming, you want to just do a little bit of extra zone 2 work to build that aerobic base. I believe we've written 50 different zone 2 workouts. And me being me and not somebody that can just go for a 30-minute hour long run or sit on an exercise bike for 45 minutes and just bike at a steady pace. I need the variety. So the workouts are really written kind of to look similar to a CrossFit workout, like every 2 minutes, switch pieces of cardio equipment, or pick a lightweight kettlebell and do 21 kettlebell swings, then 15 calories on a bike erg, and then 9 calories on a rower, just so that you're constantly moving through different things. So that's our Zone 2 ebook on there. If you jump into the Build Your Engine programs, a lot of those workouts are pretty long too. You get into
Hmm.
workouts that you're on the rower or air bike for 40 minutes or more. And so sometimes that can be a little tough to do alongside your CrossFit classes, depending on how much volume CrossFit classes program in there. So we have, for people that sign up for any of those programs, there is a 3-day a week full body strength program. So you could take that full body strength program, it takes about 45 minutes to run through it. You could do that 3 days a week, and then the Build Your Engine program 3 days a week. And that's a solid strength and conditioning program if you need to work on those two separate areas and maybe just need a break from CrossFit. That a lot of times is not a bad thing to help your CrossFit performance. Or you could even do that full body program and then throw in a gymnastics program on top of it, which is what I did. So I was doing my 3 days a week of Build Your Engine, 3 days a week of full body strength, plus doing a gymnastics program on top of that to build up my gymnastics skills.
Yeah. I think that's a great thing too. Like I'm a endurance athlete that trains CrossFit to stay strong for my sport. But I still take 4 months of my year and do no endurance-based training. So I'm in that phase right now where like I still bike a little bit for zone 2 work because again I can be on my phone doing maybe other things while I'm doing that. But like I'm not doing anything that looks like normal endurance training because you just get beat up and burn out. And like, so just no matter what your thing is, if you're a CrossFit athlete, like make sure you do take time off. One, because it's good for your skills and there's a lot of things to work on within CrossFit, but two, because it will just keep you motivated to go attack miserable workouts. If you just take a little time and cross
Yeah.
train a little bit. So
I'm always surprised with myself and other athletes that I work with, just how little CrossFit fitness you lose as long as you're staying active doing
yeah.
other stuff. I mean, yeah, you're not going to go and PR Fran the week you get back into CrossFit, but you get back into CrossFit for 4 to 6 weeks and you're back to where you were prior to taking a couple months break, and then have the potential to accelerate even more because you brought up some of these weak points if conditioning, for example, is your weak point.
Yeah. I I want to add something to that, but I think maybe we'll do another podcast on like maintaining CrossFit while training endurance things, because that's a whole different animal there. And yeah, so I will say that you can do it. You can be an endurance athlete and come back and not be crushed by 95-pound thrusters, but it takes a lot of effort. So, um, well, guys, thank you for listening to that nerddom. That was fun.
Yeah.
See you soon.